So Attorney General Jeff Sessions is not invited to Camp David this weekend. Now, the only reason that is weird is because the president is hosting a Camp David. The vice president, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, the secretary of homeland security, the secretary of education, the head of the CIA, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, the head of the EPA, the deputy head of the transportation department, also all of the congressional leadership on the Republican side, and his chief of staff, and his top legislation guy, and the political director for the White House, and the top economic advisor at the White House, and the guy who does all the personnel for the White House, and Sarah Huckabee, who has not already been fired or indicted. And a bunch of people you haven't heard of. They are all going to spend a frigid weekend together in Camp David, but not Jeff Sessions. And this is not like some official event. It's not like a State of the Union thing where they need a designated survivor. So they need to keep somebody somewhere safe in case something bad happens at Camp David. It's nothing like that. He just isn't invited. And at one level, who cares, right? I mean, maybe you feel bad for Jeff Sessions. Maybe you think he might be cold up there. It is going to be a really cold weekend, and he's from Alabama. Maybe that would be hard for him, but I don't know. I mean, if this is a big summit because something important is about to happen, and if it is a deliberate and important decision that Jeff Sessions is conspicuously not there, well, I think there might at least be reason to brace yourself for this weekend in terms of what might be happening here. Last night, the New York Times reported in a bombshell piece from Michael Schmidt that the president personally ordered the White House counsel to go to the Justice Department this past spring to try to persuade Jeff Sessions to not recuse himself from the Russia investigation. Now, this is important for a couple of reasons. One is the reported context. According to Michael Schmidt's reporting in the New York Times last night, the president explained at the time why it was so important to him that Jeff Sessions not recuse himself. He explained that as being based on his belief, reportedly, that the attorney general should protect him from the Russia investigation. Another reason this is potentially important is that under the strict rules that govern the way the White House and the Department of Justice are supposed to have contact with one another, the White House counsel, Don McGahn, he is actually one of the few White House officials who's allowed to have direct contact with the Justice Department. But the whole reason those rules exist is to prevent the White House, any White House, from having untoward influence on law enforcement decisions that are made at the Justice Department. There's a reason there's strict rules about not very many people from the White House being allowed to speak to Justice Department officials. Don McGahn is one of the people who is allowed to speak to the Justice Department under those very strict rules. But if he was sent to the Justice Department by the president specifically to interfere with the Justice Department on a law enforcement matter, specifically to interfere with Jeff Sessions' recusal decision, which is part of how the Justice Department administers the rule of law, then that would be a pretty obvious violation of those important rules that govern how the White House and the Justice Department are supposed to communicate with each other so as to avoid White House pressure on law enforcement decisions. So if McGahn lobbied Sessions on his recusal, if McGahn did in fact do what the White House Times, what the New York Times reports he did, there's a reasonable legal ethics case to be made that Don McGahn should resign as White House counsel for having done that. That said, NBC furthered this story today when they reported that the president didn't just send the White House counsel, Don McGahn, to the Justice Department to go lobby Jeff Sessions. According to NBC, the president sent multiple senior White House personnel to the Justice Department to lobby Jeff Sessions that he shouldn't recuse himself from the Russia investigation. So both of those things, both the fact that the president reportedly said the reason Sessions shouldn't recuse is so the president can be protected from that FBI investigation, and the prospect that the prospect that the White House counsel may have violated the rules about contact with the Justice Department that are supposed to protect these things from White House pressure, both of those may prove to be a real problem for the president and some of his senior advisors in terms of potential criminal liability on obstruction of justice. I mean, if he was trying to interfere with the recusal decision because he thought that could shield him from an FBI criminal inquiry, that is a problem. But that all happened this spring. And now we have arrived at this weekend, with now reams and reams and months of reporting about how angry the president is that the lobbying didn't work, that Jeff Sessions didn't recuse himself from the Russia investigation. So the president this weekend will be hosting this big Republican and cabinet summit, conspicuously without Jeff Sessions in attendance. If this is a prelude to the president firing Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, that'll be important on its own terms, right? But it would also pretty directly give the president a way to finally end the Russia investigation that has so animated him and vexed him from the very beginning of his administration. If Jeff Sessions were removed and a new attorney general was installed, that new attorney general wouldn't be recused from overseeing the Russia investigation. Right? So that new attorney general could take over responsibility for overseeing the Russia investigation from Rod Rosenstein. And in that oversight role, overseeing the Russia investigation, a new attorney general appointed by the president could defund, dismantle, otherwise try to stymie the work of the special counsel Robert Mueller. That is why everybody's on the edge of their seat about who got invited to Camp David and who didn't. That was also the glaring exclamation point subtext to the headlines you undoubtedly saw today about how much Scott Pruitt, the head of the EPA, would very much like to be the next attorney general, should an opening arise. Now, that is either EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt thinking that Jeff Sessions is about to get fired as attorney general and he's just saying, pick me, boss, pick me. Or this is a more considered effort by the administration, which knows Jeff Sessions is about to get fired, and they are floating Scott Pruitt's name as the new AG as a trial balloon. So I know it's cold. I know it's dark. It's January. Looking forward to turning off the news this weekend and curling up with the latest Slow Burn podcast. I know you are. I know you are. But that issue about Jeff Sessions and whether it means something more than it looks like, that he's not invited to this otherwise big Republican and cabinet summit this weekend with the president, it's worth watching over the next couple of days. And, you know, today was a pretty remarkable day of news itself. Partisan unity has broken down in some important ways on the two gigantic policy changes that the administration announced yesterday, on both the administration's decision to basically recriminalize pot all over the country, including in states that have legalized it, and in their decision to open up to offshore drilling the entire East Coast and West Coast, including Florida and California and the Carolinas and all the rest of it. Not just Democrats today, but lots of elected Republicans, particularly in the affected states, today signaled their opposition to those big announcements from the Trump administration yesterday and said they will fight the Trump administration on both of those matters. There's not a lot of issues on which there's partisan disunity anymore, but those two appear to be ones that can rile even Republicans who otherwise like President Trump. So that was big news today. And from Congress, we actually got a big landmark moment today. After the intelligence community released its assessment a year ago tomorrow, which said that Russia had interfered in our presidential election to try to help Trump and hurt Clinton, after that came out, multiple congressional committees, even in the Republican-led Congress, expressed alarm and started full-scale investigations into the Russian attack and into the crucial question of whether or not the Russians had American Confederates who knew what the Russians were doing or who might have been involved in what the Russians were doing at the time. Well, that all started basically a year ago with that Intelligence Committee assessment. Today, after multiple committees in the House and the Senate have spent a rancorous year investigating and talking to witnesses and subpoenaing documents and fighting about the scope of their investigations, all looking at these very serious allegations about Russia. Today, for the first time, 364 days since the Intelligence Committee's assessment, today, for the first time, Congress made a criminal referral to the Justice Department, deriving from its investigation into the Russia matter. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham have finally found someone who they think should face criminal charges in the Russian attack on our election. They said today that they would like the Justice Department to consider bringing charges against the one person who actually called the FBI when he found out that Russia was trying to play a role in our election to help Donald Trump. You know, we count more than 19 different people associated with the Russian government who made contact with people associated with the Trump campaign or the Trump organization while Donald Trump was running for president. Several of these 19 different Russians provided explicitly provided information that they were there. They were making contact to provide Russian government help for the presidential election to the Trump campaign. But nobody associated with the Trump campaign ever reacted to any one of those overtures by calling the FBI. even after the FBI warned the Trump organization to be on the lookout for that sort of thing. There's only one person who we know who actually called the cops when they saw this crime happen. There's one person we know of who observed evidence of Russia maybe trying to interfere in that election to help Trump. There's one person who saw that evidence, recognized it as potentially a very serious crime, and 911 called the FBI. The one person who did that is the person who Lindsey Graham and Chuck Grassley today told the Justice Department to investigate for potentially, maybe, possibly having committed a crime. They released this cover letter, but not a classified document they said was attached to it. They are apparently alleging that former British intelligence agent Christopher Steele might have mixed up some dates when describing to investigators when exactly he had off-the-record conversations with reporters about his intelligence reports, the ones he had handed over to the FBI. You know, it is not unheard of for congressional investigators to make a criminal referral to the Justice Department. Right? If in the course of their congressional investigation they turn up some information that law enforcement doesn't have, it's not unheard of for Congress to notify the relevant law enforcement agent, hey, we turned up something that looks like you might want to prosecute it. That has happened, for example, in some serious ethics cases for members of Congress. Ethics Committee is doing some intense investigation of a member of Congress who is accused of some serious ethics violation. In the course of their investigation, they turn up serious evidence of potential criminal wrongdoing by that member of Congress, wrongdoing that was not otherwise known to or being pursued by the relevant law enforcement agency. In cases like that, the Ethics Committee would finish their report, their Ethics Committee report on the member's behavior, but they might also make a criminal referral to the appropriate law enforcement agency if they turned up something very serious that law enforcement wasn't otherwise onto. That's not what happened here. In this case, Senator Chuck Grassley and Senator Lindsey Graham do not appear to have turned up any new information concerning former MI6 spy Christopher Steele. The reason their so-called criminal referral to the Justice Department about him today is in part classified is because what these two just sent to the Justice Department about Christopher Steele is information they got from the Justice Department about Christopher Steele. They didn't turn up anything in their congressional investigation that the Justice Department didn't already know about. What they did today was they gave the Justice Department back their own information that they had obtained from the Justice Department about Christopher Steele, saying, hey, have you seen this? No, seriously, this stuff that you gave us, have you seen it? We're sending it back to you. That is not the way these things usually go. I mean, for obvious reasons, that is not the way these things usually go. But they did put out a very strongly worded press release about it. And they got lots and lots of headlines about how they want this guy criminally prosecuted. You know, the dossier guy. You know, it's incredible. Once upon a time, it is incredible. Once upon a time, this White House was actually concerned that the Republican-led Congress and its congressional investigations into the Russia matter might be something the White House had to worry about, that the White House should try to shut down. Right? We know from New York Times reporting this fall that the president directly contacted Senator Richard Burr on the Intelligence Committee and Senator Roy Blunt on the Intelligence Committee and Mitch McConnell, the top Republican in the Senate. The president directly contacting those members of the Senate, pressuring them to drop the congressional Russia investigations. We sure he needed to bother? I mean, what's received more attention are the president's efforts to stop not the congressional investigations, but the FBI investigation, right? The president lobbying Jeff Sessions to not recuse himself. The president telling the director of national intelligence, Dan Coats, to press the FBI to stop their Russia investigation. The president telling the FBI director, James Comey, that he needed to remove the cloud of the Russia investigation over the Trump presidency. He needed to lay off the investigation into Mike Flynn. He needed to be loyal to the president. The president firing James Comey when Comey didn't agree to any of that. Once Robert Mueller was appointed special counsel, we know the president also pressured Republican Senator Tom Tillis to drop his legislative efforts to protect Robert Mueller from being fired by the president. Right, so that stuff's received a lot more attention, the president trying to shut down the FBI investigation. But if the president had once upon a time been worried that the investigations in Congress also might pose a real threat to him in terms of exposing what really happened with Russia, I think those worries, it's safe to say, have probably been resolved. Because 1 year on, basically what these Republican-led committees in Congress have turned their investigations into are full-time battering ram efforts to protect the president from the FBI to protect the president from the ongoing criminal investigation, to discredit Robert Mueller, the special counsel, to discredit the whole FBI as best they can. When James Comey documented the fact that the president had pressured him to drop the Russia investigation before he was fired, Republicans in Congress went after the memos that Comey wrote up to document the president's behavior, saying those memos might have been classified, or they should have been classified. And when Comey talked about them, he leaked classified information, or, at least he leaked government property. When the FBI and the Justice Department brought it to the White House's attention that the Trump National Security Advisor had been secretly talking to the Russian government and lying about it, Republicans in Congress joined the White House to try to make the scandal there the fact that the FBI knew about what Mike Flynn had done. They wiretapped us. There's been unmasking. Republicans in Congress have tried to say that the real scandal is not what Russia did in our elections or the question of whether or not they had help. The real scandal is Uranium One or the Clinton Foundation. Yeah, that's the real Russia scandal. Republicans supposedly investigating the Russia scandal have instead decided that the real scandal that they really want to look into is that some people inside the FBI or who have worked on the special counsel's team are people who have privately expressed political opinions of wide-ranging ideological interest during the campaign, which is something that FBI agents are absolutely allowed to do. It has been Republicans in Congress who have aggressively pursued this storyline that Christopher Steele's intelligence reports on Trump and Russia and Russia's intervention in the election, those intelligence reports themselves are somehow terrible. It's bad that they exist. And when Christopher Steele handed them over to the FBI because he was concerned that he had stumbled upon evidence of a monstrous ongoing crime, well, then that somehow tainted the FBI as well. And so a year ago tomorrow, when the intelligence community put out its assessment about what Russia did, there really was a moment of bipartisan near unanimity that this was very bad news about what Russia had done. And maybe we as a country should get to the bottom of it, make sure we understand what happened. We should find out if there are Americans who were in on that attack who need to be brought to justice. I mean, just 1 year ago, people pretty much agreed on that, even some Republicans, enough to start all these Republican-led congressional investigations at least. But now at the 1 year mark, it is remarkable to see how far most Republicans in Congress have swung toward aggressively trying to stop the criminal and counterintelligence investigation into what happened. I mean, not only are they not using their own investigations to figure this out, but they are using their power in Congress to try to stop the external investigation that's happening at the special counsel's office. If we are being honest, though, and clear-eyed about this, I think it is also worth recognizing how successful their efforts have been to stop this investigation. I mean, not just to stop their own investigations in Congress, which they have largely done, but to use their power in Congress to stop the criminal investigations into these matters happening first at the FBI and then in the special counsel's office. Right? It's one thing to see the Republicans in the White House push. It's another thing to see it work, to see the Justice Department and the FBI roll over and give them what they want. So just take stock of this for a second. With this weird gambit today, where they're referring Christopher Steele for criminal charges, whether or not that ever results in there being criminal charges about him, you can pretty much guarantee that means he will not be coming to the United States of America to give any public testimony about what he found when he did his investigation into Trump and Russia. Republicans have also succeeded in blocking the public release of hours and hours and hours of sworn closed-door testimony about Christopher Steele's findings when they prevented the release of those transcripts of testimony from Fusion GPS, who hired Christopher Steele to do his work. They've also succeeded in harassing Fusion GPS, potentially to their existential limit. Today, they forced Fusion's bank to hand over financial records relating to the firm. All financial records relating to the firm, which may very well destroy them as a firm. After Paul Ryan intervened on his behalf, crusading Trump partisan Congressman Devin Nunes, who heads up the Intelligence Committee, succeeded today in forcing the FBI to hand over, quote, FBI investigative documents that are considered law enforcement sensitive and are rarely released or shared outside the Bureau. The FBI had resisted handing over those documents because they're relevant to their ongoing investigation. They're law enforcement sensitive. But now, Justice Department doesn't feel that strongly about it anymore. They've caved. They're handing them over in the middle of the investigation. They're also handing over high-ranking FBI officials who will now be questioned by Nunes and his committee, even though those same officials have said that for them to testify at this point about what they know would interfere with the FBI's ongoing criminal investigation. Those officials include one of the 5 top FBI leaders who were briefed by James Comey contemporaneously about the president reportedly telling him to shut down the FBI's Russia investigation. One of those guys, the Republicans are getting to testify now, even though he says his testimony will interfere with the ongoing investigation. Another one of those guys who Comey had as a contemporaneous witness, another one of the 5, is FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, who has been under sustained Republican attack for most of the last year. Over the holiday break, it was announced that he will be retiring from the FBI. He's 49 years old. Another one of the 5 corroborating witnesses for James Comey in terms of his interactions with the president is FBI counsel James Baker. It was recently announced without explanation that he will be reassigned at the Bureau from that high-ranking position. That's 3 of the 5. Plus the way they've gone after Comey. Republicans in Congress are also about to obtain hundreds, if not thousands, hundreds, if not thousands more personal texts from FBI and DOJ officials, between 2 FBI and DOJ officials who were in a relationship, having an affair. Once those texts are released to Republicans in Congress, they will no doubt leak them to the press for maximum partisan and humiliating effect. They're getting those texts, those personal texts, because the FBI is handing them over to the Republicans in Congress, having already given several hundred of them to reporters. This is the FBI's own agents. They're handing over their personal texts. And to cap it all off, over the last 24 hours, the FBI and the Justice Department have confirmed that whatever else they're giving up in response to all this Republican pressure on the Russia investigation, the FBI and the Justice Department have just confirmed they are actively looking into Uranium One and the Clinton Foundation and Hillary Clinton's emails again. It's been 1 year. In that year, Republicans have turned from ostensibly wanting to get to the bottom of what Russia did to now doing everything they can to stop that investigation. But if we're being clear-eyed about this, it is also worth noting that the FBI and the Justice Department are now in a very different position than they used to be in. They have also gone from resisting that Republican pressure and that White House pressure to handing over their agents, handing over their officials, handing over sensitive documents, and agreeing that, yeah, maybe they should be looking into whether somebody ought to lock her up. We shouldn't be surprised by the pushback that evolved over the course of this past year. We maybe should be surprised that it's working.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.